Barnett hands to Woody up the middle, touchdown! Iowa State has won it! Jeff Woody took it in, and the Cyclones have upset the nation's second-ranked team.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Cyclone Fan Perspective. As always, brought to you by Play the Fight Song podcast. Week 12 is upon us. The Cyclones host the number 7 ranked Texas Longhorns, according to the College Football Playoff, on Fox at 7, a night game in Jack Trice Stadium. I don't think you can ask for much more than this. Big 12 implications on the line. Every game matters in November when you're playing meaningful football in November. That's really all you can ask for, especially as an Iowa State fan. The Week 12 slate is going to be a good one, as usual. Listen to all of your college football content from us, as our Week 12 preview will come out and drop this Thursday. And let's get into it, because there's a lot to talk about. Cyclones take on Texas for probably the final time. I don't imagine we will see Texas, at least for the next decade, maybe the next 20 years. I don't know. They're often running to the SEC, and this is the last time Iowa State will get to play Texas in Jack Trice Stadium. So to say Iowa State and that crowd will be fired up on Saturday night is short selling it, and it's a very big understatement. Let's get into it a little bit. Let's talk about the Longhorns. I think this is a team everybody has pretty much watched all year. This team started off hot. It was probably, at least in my opinion, college football playoff team, especially through the first 4 weeks. I thought it was a college football national championship contender, the way they were playing through the first 4 or 5 weeks. They went on the road at Alabama and kind of shocked the college football nation that put everybody's eyes on Texas for the entire year. They lost in kind of a shootout in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl to Oklahoma. And then since then, they've kind of just zombie walked their way through the last few weeks. The last 4 of their last 5 games have actually come within one possession. Last week, they won at TCU 29-26, where they were up 26-7 in that football game. The week prior, they beat Kansas State in overtime 33-30, where they were up 27-7 in that football game. The only one they really haven't had trouble with was when BYU came to town. Other than that, they struggled on the road at Houston. Quinn Ewers went out in that game. That probably played a big factor into it. But that was another game. I think they were up 21-0 in that football game. So this team gets out to hot starts. They look like the team we saw who won at Alabama way early in the season. But then in the second half, they kind of coast. We'll kind of look into that. We'll kind of see why and what to expect for this team going to Ames on Saturday. On the injury front, big injuries. Texas lost its starting running back in Jonathan Brooks. I said in our preview on Sunday night with Justin, I think this might be a bigger loss than Quinn Ewers. But he's getting replaced by 5-star freshman CJ Baxter, who has had multiple touches throughout the year. This isn't like fresh and brand new to him. I think he's an explosive back, but he's a guy that hasn't really shown everything that he's capable of this year. He had about a 50-yard breakout run against Kansas State. But other than that, he hasn't really shown a ton yet, but he's got a big opportunity on Saturday in front of a national audience. Another guy you can look out for is Jaden Blue. He has, I think, 30-ish carries for Texas this year. Obviously, he's going to get a lot more on Saturday when CJ's not in the game. But that's another guy to look out for. 2 guys that are big recruits. I mean, that's what you get out of Texas. It really doesn't matter if their star players go out because they're going to reload with 4- and 5-star guys. I think Brooks is a huge injury. He has 1,100 yards this season. He's been a huge piece to really open up the passing game and their stud receivers, which we'll talk about. So I'm interested to see how they respond without him, because that's the reason why they've been blowing these big leads, is that they kind of stray away from the running game, even with Brooks when he was available. So why is that? I'm not sure. We'll talk about that later as we move on. Let's look at Iowa State's injury front. Matt Campbell says that Jeremiah Cooper is more likely to play than not. In Matt Campbell fashion, I think that means he's optimistic about Cooper playing. Cooper dressed up at BYU. He took warm-ups. They even posted a picture of him previewing the BYU game to kind of tease us all as Iowa State fans. So I'm going to expect that he's ready to go, which will be absolutely massive for our defense going in against that awesome receiving group on Saturday. No word on Brendan Black. He went out in the BYU game. This isn't a giant injury, but he stepped in later in the year, and he's been a nice piece on our offensive line. I don't know if no one's really said anything about it. I think that's because everybody wants to ask what's Cooper's situation, but also Grant Schreiber could replace him at that spot, and I don't really feel that uncomfortable with it. Schreiber's a guy who's started multiple games at Iowa State. It's going to be his senior night. So if Black's not good to go, it is what it is. We're really going to have to survive through the short passes anyways. And we'll get into that because they have a giant matchup against an awesome defensive line in the Texas Longhorns. The players to watch when you're looking at Texas. I highlighted all of their receivers, every single one of them. Okay, let's talk about them more specifically. Jordan Whittington, he's a kind of a slot guy for Texas. He has the ability to get to the outside and make explosive plays. You have the Georgia transfer and A.D. Mitchell. He's been an absolute awesome Robin to their Batman, which is Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy is probably a top 5 receiver in college football. He's not big and physical, but he's as shifty as they come, and he's faster than probably anybody else on our secondary, and that might include TJ Tampa. So he might have his work cut out for him. We'll see. I'm excited to see that secondary matchup against these receivers, but those are 3 guys specifically that can light up any room, and those guys can probably be the number 1 receiving option on almost any college football team in America. That's how good this receiving group is. But with those receivers, they're paired up with one of the best tight ends in college football. Ja'Tavion Sanders is, I think, a top 3 tight end in college football. He's 3rd on the team in receptions. He's a big physical guy who's a freak of an athlete. As good as those receivers are, I think Sanders has the ability to really create problems for this Iowa State secondary. If anything has ever been a problem with John Haycock's defense in the passing game, I think it's really good tight ends, because as much as we can match up with these really awesome receivers, when you have a guy at the tight end position who can get out free and maybe some play action situations, who can look like he's going to block, that's a real problem, because he's fast, he's physical, and he's just as good of a receiver as any of those guys on the team. And he'd probably be Iowa State's best receiver, if I'm going to be honest. So he's a freak of nature. Then let's move to the defensive side, because they have studs and dudes all across the field. A group that's not very limited, but can sleep at times. I'm really interested to see how that works out, maybe in Iowa State's favor. Will this team show up? Will this defense show up? If they want to play as physical as they want to, I mean, you saw them in week 2. This defensive line, and I'll highlight a couple of guys in a second, this defensive line at Texas threw around the dudes on the offensive line at Alabama. So if they're doing that, they can do it on anybody in the country. And I'm talking the Georgias, the Michigans. That's why everybody's really high on Texas. Physically, this team is as good as anybody in the college football playoff. It's just a matter of, do they have the mindset to finish football games and really stomp on teams' throats when they have the opportunity to. Devondre Sweat is the guy in the middle for this defensive line. I think he's the best interior defensive lineman in the Big 12, and he might be top 5 in college football. He's got like 35 sacks on the year. This guy, if you see him, he is massive. That's really concerning. Jared Boniface at the center position is got his work cut out for him, whether if it's Black, whether it's Schreiber, Jared Hufford, those guys in the middle of that front 5 for Iowa State on the offensive line, they have a long night ahead of them. And I don't know if Cyclone fans saw Jared Hufford's comments to the news the other night, but I'm not sure if I would have been saying those things when I got to go against Devondre Sweat. I really hope he didn't hear those quotes, because if he did, this team doesn't need motivation to go into Ames. So I really wish he would have kept his mouth shut. But hey, he talks the talk. Let's back it up. I'm all for it. Another guy on the defensive side for Texas, Jalen Ford, is the guy at the linebacker position you want to look out for. This guy's a stud. He leads the team in tackles. He was the guy, if you remember, I believe he was the guy who forced a fumble on Deckers to close out the game last year that lost us the football game. And then he stood up over Deckers and flexed on him. I don't know if you guys remember, but Campbell had some harsh comments for Ford from the sideline. I'm not going to say those words on here because this is a kid's show too. But while Hufford was saying some stuff to get Texas motivated, I think that's a play Iowa State still has the back of their head where they kind of want to show Ford what's up, and they might want to get after him early, especially on the offensive line. And then last but not least, we got to talk about him. Quinn Ewers, a guy who's coming back next year. Unfortunately, the Cyclones won't see him again, but he's probably one of the more popular names in college football. A lot of the casuals know who Quinn Ewers is. He was hurt. He got hurt in that Houston game. He sat out, I believe, the BYU game, as well as I think that was the only game he sat out. I have to go back and check. But Murphy stepped up in the Houston game, finished it out for him. And the vibe with Ewers and his injury from the flagship on Horns 24/7, if you want to go and listen to a podcast on Texas, that's the one I would recommend. Stark says that he thinks that Ewers is 100% healthy and good to go. Obviously, coaches BS all the time. They don't want to give any other coach an edge, especially on the injury front. But from listening to those guys on 247, they're not confident that Ewers is 100%. Now, I didn't get a ton of eyes on the TCU game. I didn't really go back and watch it. But they really thought that he's not making the throws that he made in that second half versus Alabama. You know, that's really what separated them in that win in Tuscaloosa is they took the top off the defense. They hit Mitchell. They hit Worthy on huge plays, and Ewers was able to make those throws. So that's what I look for in this one against Iowa State, because Iowa State's not really going to give anything up on the back end with those great safeties. The one chance or the two chances that they might get, like Kansas got them, can Ewers take advantage of it? Is his shoulder feeling good enough to make those throws? I'm really interested to see that. And it's a little encouraging that Texas's very own guys don't think that he's 100%. So that might be in Iowa State's favor as well. All right. My big question of the game. I guess I have two questions, one for both sides. For Texas, to start, does he stay with the run game if it's not there early? He ran the ball 3 times in the third quarter versus TCU. That's how they got back in the game. I don't know if he's just getting bored. Like, buddy, we know you have more talent than every single team outside of Oklahoma in this conference. So I don't know if he gets these big leads and he's just getting bored, if he's an offensive mind. Is he trying new stuff for future references, maybe for games like this? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But if you're only running the ball 3 times when you have Jonathan Brooks on the field, what are you going to do when he does it? So I'm interested to see how they respond early. I'm interested to see if they want to try to establish the run early. I think they're good enough to do it, even with Brooks out. You still have a 5-star freshman, CJ Baxter, who will be an NFL guy one day. Maybe they try to get him going early. And if Iowa State's able to stop the run with Jeremiah Cooper back, I think that's really possible. I think Cooper and Verdone together, it makes it seem like we almost have 5-6 linebackers on the field. So if they can stop Baxter early, I'm interested to see how Sark responds. And if he just abandons it, he says, nope, we have top 3 receivers in college football. We have one of the best tight ends. We have an NFL-type quarterback in the future. We're just going to rely on throwing the football. I am really interested to see how Iowa State handles that and see how Sark calls a game. I think that's the biggest thing. Again, you go back to the flagship on 247 for the Texas team. If you listen to that podcast, it's a group that's not very impressed with Sark's play calling. They don't like how he abandons the run. He gets kind of complacent in these games. He lets these teams crawl back. This is a team and this is a program in Texas that has national championship expectations, and they don't want to see us, or they don't want to see them, come within 7 within Houston. They don't want to blow 20-point leads to Kansas State and TCU. They want to beat every team by 30, especially in this last year of the Big 12. So if I'm Sark, if I'm going to Jack Trice Stadium in a night game, I'm not playing around. Take advantage of it while you can. My question for Iowa State: Does Iowa State throw the ball right away? Granted, it was hard to measure because you get the muff kick and you get the interception against BYU, but they kind of ran the ball early. They ran it on the first 2 plays, I believe, in both possessions, and it worked well. I'll give them that. They were able to get 5-6 yards with Sanders and Norton, but that's BYU's defensive line. I hate to say it, it is massively depleted. They're playing with walk-ons on that second level for BYU. You are not getting that with Texas. When you have your first stringers who are already studs and best in the country, they're going to move to their second string guys who are 4 stars and 5 stars. So I don't know if Iowa State should try to dominate their physicality up front, because I don't know if that's going to be an option. The first 3 plays of the game for me on offense is super intriguing. I'm interested to see if they try to get Rocco comfortable. Rocco came out and said this is the best defensive line they're playing. Now he's kind of stating the obvious, but it's true. And Rocco Beck, as a freshman, this is probably the biggest game you've played all year. How do you respond? So that's what I'm looking for. I'm really interested to see if Iowa State tries to be physical early. So let's go into it. You know, I give it to you every week. Let's go talk about the 3 keys I think this Iowa State team needs to have in order to win. Number 1, shut down Baxter in the run game early. He's a freshman and he's got NFL type talent, but expose him for what he is. So what does that mean? He hasn't fumbled all year, and Iowa State's not a team that forces fumbles, but maybe this is the time to do it. When you can rely on Cooper being back there, maybe we can get a little more aggressive. We can send more guys, and in that, we can try to strip the ball a little more aggressively. It might lead to some missed tackles, but who knows? If you get the freshman to fumble early, how does that go into his psyche for the rest of the game? I think that could really set the tone. And maybe if not a fumble, just limit them 2 yards of carry. Establish that you are dominant just as much as they are on the defensive side. Key number 2 is you got to stay on the field. Offensively, you have to stay on the field. Iowa State ranks 73rd in third down conversions. And I think it was worse than that going off of last week, because they were 8 of 14 last week. Now, I'm not saying you need to clip 60% of your third downs, but I would say you got to at least get 40, right? You know, we don't want to get into a bunch of third down situations, but if we have to, you have to. You got to convert. Rocco's got to be efficient. And that's another thing too. This Texas defense is really aggressive. They're just as good as Iowa State is as picking it off. Rocco, we can't have another pick 6. And to be honest, I don't know if we can afford to force a turnover or create a turnover for them, because this offense on their side it's too good to give them the ball back in bad field position. Key number 3, and I think this one's important. It's senior night. You've already clipped your bowl mark. You're going to a bowl game. You're playing meaningful games in November. It's a night game. Play with nothing to lose. Seriously. You had a wide receiver pass against Kansas, and that really set the tone, and you could have converted it for 6 had Jalen Noel not underthrown him. They did the same thing a couple of years ago when Hutchinson had that touchdown pass to Tariq Milton on Texas, and that put the nail in the coffin. Now, I don't think Iowa State's going to be up as big as they were in that football game, but Matt Campbell, Nate Scheelhaase, what do you have under your sleeve? Are you going to come out with some trick play to start the second half? John Aycock, are you going to be way more aggressive? Are you not going to sit on the back end waiting for a pick? I think Quinn Ewers is too good to do that, injured or not. I don't think you can kind of sit back there and wait to bite on a pick for him, because he's going to be an NFL quarterback one day for a reason. He's a former 5-star. He's one of the best recruits at the quarterback position in the last decade. I think you got to be aggressive. You know, you can, with Cooper, you can be aggressive. You can send Sadowski. You can have Lovett spy on him. You know, McLaughlin, maybe you get another pick. That's what I got to see. Play with nothing to lose. If they go in there, if they go to Jack Trice Stadium and they win by 20 because we're taking shots, we're maybe drawing up a couple of trick plays, maybe we're sending a couple of extra guys and they beat us on the back end, like, I'm going to sleep at night. This is a college football playoff contender. This is probably a top 5 team. I think this team could even beat said Ohio State Florida State, given on a neutral field. This team is legit. So go out swinging, be aggressive. Now, going into the Big 12 slate, I like to highlight some meaningful games in the rest of the conference, especially when the race is heating up as good as this one is, and we can end up in a 3 or 4-way tie. You have the Sunflower Showdown between Kansas State. They travel to Lawrence. They take on Kansas. Can they snap the 14-game losing streak? UCF travels to Lubbock. Oklahoma has to go on the road. They're playing at Provo at 10 o'clock. I think that's really interesting. Is that an interesting spot for Oklahoma? Oklahoma State goes on the road again to a newcomer in Houston. How do they bounce back from last week? Baylor travels on the road to TCU. As garbage as their rivalry trophy is. A game makes me barf. And then to cap it off, we're renewing a rivalry between Cincinnati. They travel to West Virginia to take on the Mountaineers. But this game between Iowa State and Texas is easily the best game for the conference. I said it in our preview or my recap last week. I think this is a top 5 matchup in college football this week. It's on Fox, 7 o'clock. I think I heard a stat. Iowa State's lost 3 of its last 4 at home. It's time to turn the tide. Now, when we're recording this, I have no idea if they're going to show out the black uniforms. It's senior night. It's at night. I would go on a hunch that the black uniforms will make an appearance. So Iowa State hasn't beaten a team that arguably is better than them this season, to be frank with you. So I'm really interested to see if that narrative can change on that. And maybe we're playing for a Big 12 title appearance when we travel to Manhattan next week. We'll wait and find out. I'm super excited. I hope you guys are too. As an Iowa State fan, looking back from September and how we started off the season, to be in this position, to have this shot on national television, it doesn't get any better than that. So, as always, we'll be back here again next week. I'll be with Justin. We'll recap it. He's going to be in Jack Trice Stadium, so he'll let us know how it went. And hopefully we have some good news and a win to share. As always, you guys have a great rest of your week, and you know what it is. Go Cyclones.